The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of Emma Turner's apartment in downtown Chicago, casting soft shadows across the hardwood floor. She stood in front of her bathroom mirror, applying mascara with practiced precision, when her phone buzzed on the marble countertop. "Happy birthday to us!" Olivia's voice sang through the speaker before Emma could even say hello. Emma smiled, setting down the mascara wand. "Good morning, birthday twin. 28 feels exactly like 27 so far." "Give it time," Olivia laughed. "Mom wants us at the house by noon. She says she has something special planned." Their mother, Patricia Turner, lived in the same suburban house where the twins had grown up, a modest but well-maintained colonial in Naperville, about 40 minutes from the city. Since their father's death 5 years ago, Patricia had become increasingly sentimental about family gatherings. "Did she mention what kind of special?" Emma asked, reaching for her lipstick. "You know, Mom. Everything's a surprise until it isn't." 3 hours later, Emma pulled her Honda into the familiar driveway, parking beside Olivia's silver Subaru. The oak trees lining the street had turned brilliant shades of orange and gold, their leaves scattered across the lawn like nature's confetti. The house looked the same as it always had: white siding, black shutters, a red front door that their mother repainted every spring. Olivia was already waiting on the porch, wrapped in an oversized cardigan despite the mild October weather. The twins were identical in almost every way: the same honey-blonde hair that fell just past their shoulders, the same green eyes, the same small frame, but their styles had diverged over the years. Emma favored sleek professional clothing that reflected her career as a corporate attorney, while Olivia embraced a more artistic, bohemian aesthetic that suited her work as a freelance photographer. "She's acting weird," Olivia whispered, as Emma climbed the porch steps. "Weird how?" "Nervous weird. Like she's been baking since dawn. And you know she only stress bakes." Before Emma could respond, the front door swung open, and Patricia appeared, flour dusting her burgundy sweater. At 56, she maintained an elegant appearance, her dark hair styled in a neat bob, her makeup subtle but carefully applied. "My beautiful girls!" Patricia pulled them both into a tight embrace, and Emma caught the familiar scent of her mother's perfume mixed with vanilla and cinnamon. Come in. I've made your favorite carrot cake." The house smelled like home, a mixture of baked goods, coffee, and the lavender air freshener their mother had used for as long as Emma could remember. Family photos lined the hallway walls, chronicling the twins' journey from matching newborn outfits to college graduation gowns. In the living room, the coffee table was laden with gifts wrapped in silver paper, alongside plates of cookies, sandwiches, and the promised carrot cake. "Mom, this is too much," Emma said, though she felt warmth spreading through her chest. "Nonsense. My girls only turned 28 once." Patricia's voice wavered slightly, and she busied herself pouring coffee from an ornate pot. They spent the next hour catching up, laughing about Olivia's recent photography exhibition and Emma's latest courtroom victory. Patricia seemed to relax as the conversation flowed, but Emma noticed her mother's hands trembling slightly when she cut the cake. "Open your gifts," Patricia urged, settling into the armchair across from them. The first few packages contained thoughtful presents: a leather portfolio for Emma, a vintage camera lens for Olivia, matching bracelets engraved with their initials. But the last gift was different. Patricia handed them a single box, wrapped more carefully than the others, with a handwritten card attached. Emma read the card aloud. "For my daughters, on your 28th birthday. Some truths are harder to share than others, but you deserve to know where you came from. With all my love, Mom." Olivia's fingers worked at the wrapping paper, while Emma's stomach tightened with inexplicable anxiety. Inside was an old shoebox, the kind that had once held Patricia's wedding shoes. When Olivia lifted the lid, they found it filled with yellowed papers, photographs, and a leather-bound journal with a small brass lock. "What is this?" Olivia asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Patricia's face had gone pale. She clasped her hands together in her lap, knuckles white. "It's time you knew the truth about your father and me, about how you came to be." Emma's heart began to race. She reached for the journal, noticing the lock had already been opened, the small key taped to the cover. The first page was dated March 1996, nearly 9 months before their birth. "I've carried this secret for 28 years, Patricia continued, her voice breaking. "I thought I was protecting you, but you're women now. You deserve to know." Olivia's hand found Emma's, squeezing tightly. Whatever was in this journal, whatever truth their mother was about to reveal, Emma sensed it would change everything they thought they knew about their family. "Mom, what did you do?" Emma heard herself ask. Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "I got pregnant on purpose. I trapped your father into marrying me. But it's more complicated than that. It's the two of you. There's something about the two of you that I've never told anyone." The afternoon light seemed to dim, the cheerful birthday celebration transforming into something heavier, more ominous. Emma opened the journal to the first entry, her eyes scanning the familiar handwriting of her mother's younger self. The first line made her blood run cold. "Today I stopped taking my birth control pills. Richard doesn't know, and he never will. This is the only way to keep him." Beside her, Olivia had gone rigid, her breathing shallow. Emma forced herself to continue reading, even as her world began to tilt on its axis. The living room had grown cold despite the autumn sun streaming through the windows. Emma clutched the journal in her hands, her fingers trembling as she turned to the second page. Olivia sat frozen beside her, her face drained of color, eyes fixed on their mother. Patricia had moved to the window, her back to her daughters, shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. "Mom," Olivia finally spoke, her voice sharp. "You need to explain. Now." Patricia turned slowly, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She'd cried all her tears years ago, Emma realized. This was a confession that had been rehearsed, perhaps in front of this very window, countless times. "Your father, Richard, we met when I was 26, Patricia began, settling back into the armchair with the careful movements of someone much older. "He was 35, successful, charming. He worked in finance, made good money. I was a receptionist at his firm." Emma exchanged a glance with Olivia. They'd heard this story before, the romantic version of how their parents met. But now, knowing what the journal contained, every word felt tainted. "He didn't want marriage," Patricia continued. "He'd been clear about that from the beginning. But I was in love, desperately, foolishly in love, and I was terrified of losing him." She paused, her hands twisting in her lap. "He started talking about taking a position in London, a 2-year contract. He wanted me to come with him, but not as his wife, just as his companion. So you sabotaged your birth control," Emma said flatly. "I thought if I got pregnant, he'd have to marry me, have to stay." Patricia's voice cracked. "I know how it sounds. I know what I did was wrong, manipulative, but I was panicking. I couldn't lose him." Olivia stood abruptly, pacing to the mantel where their baby pictures stood in matching silver frames. "And it worked, didn't it? You got pregnant and he married you." "Yes." Patricia's whisper was barely audible. "We got married at City Hall in January 1997. He was angry, but he did the right thing, or what he thought was the right thing. He canceled London, bought this house, became the father you remember." Emma felt nauseous. The father she remembered had been loving, present, devoted. He'd coached their soccer teams, attended every school play, taught them to ride bikes in this very driveway. Had all of it been a lie? Had he resented them every day? "Did he know?" Emma asked. "Did Dad know what you did?" "No," Patricia said quickly. "I never told him. He thought it was an accident, a failure of birth control, which, I suppose, was technically true." "It was sabotage," Olivia spat, whirling around. "You sabotaged your own birth control to trap a man into marriage. That's not an accident, Mom. That's... I know what it is," Patricia interrupted, her voice firmer now. "I've lived with it every day for 28 years. I've had to look at you two, my beautiful daughters, and know that your existence began with my lie." Emma opened the journal again, flipping through pages filled with her mother's anxious handwriting. Entries about taking pregnancy tests, about telling Richard, about his initial anger that eventually transformed into resigned acceptance, about the wedding, small and quick, with no guests beyond 2 witnesses pulled from the street. But then, halfway through the journal, Emma found an entry that made her stop breathing. "March 15th, 1997, she read aloud, her voice shaking. The ultrasound confirmed it. Twins. The doctor says they're identical, which means they came from a single embryo that split. But the timing is wrong. I got pregnant the first month I stopped the pills, which means conception happened in early April. But Richard and we didn't. Oh God. What have I done?" The room spun. Emma looked up at her mother, whose face had gone completely white. "What does that mean?" Olivia demanded. "What is she talking about?" Patricia closed her eyes. a single tear sliding down her cheek. Richard wasn't your biological father. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Emma felt Olivia grab her arm, steadying them both. What? Olivia's voice was a whisper now. I was seeing someone else, Patricia said, the words tumbling out faster now, as if she needed to say them all before she lost courage. Just for a few weeks before I stopped my pills. Someone from my old neighborhood. It was casual, meaningless, and I ended it as soon as Richard and I became serious. But the timing, when I got pregnant so quickly, I realized. I counted back the days, and you didn't know which one of them was our father, Emma finished, her voice hollow. Patricia nodded. I prayed it was Richard. I convinced myself it had to be. The timing could have worked out, but then the ultrasound showed twins. Identical twins. And the dates. The conception date the doctor gave me. She broke off, pressing her hand to her mouth. Who was he? Emma heard herself ask. Who was the other man? His name was Marcus Webb. He was a mechanic. We grew up on the same street in Pilsen. Patricia's voice had gone distant, as if she were speaking about someone else's life. We'd known each other since we were kids. After I met Richard, Marcus and we reconnected at a mutual friend's wedding. It was brief, maybe 3 weeks. I ended it because I wanted to be with Richard, wanted the life Richard could give me. Did you ever tell him? Olivia's voice was ice. Did Marcus Webb ever know he might have children? Patricia shook her head. I couldn't. By the time I realized the timeline, Richard and I were already married, and I was 4 months pregnant. Marcus had moved to Denver for a job. I let him go without a word. Emma's mind reeled with the implications. Everything she'd believed about her family, her identity, her history, it was all built on lies. The man who'd raised them, who'd taught them to throw a baseball and helped with homework and walked them down the aisle at their high school father-daughter dance, he might not have been their biological father at all, and he'd never known. When did you find out for sure? Emma asked, her lawyer's mind automatically seeking facts, evidence, timeline. I never did, Patricia admitted. I was too afraid to do a paternity test. I thought if Richard ever suspected, if he ever questioned it, I could claim ignorance. But he never did. He looked at you two when you were born, and he fell in love. You became his daughters, and that was that. But you knew, Olivia said, her voice breaking. All these years, you knew we might not be his biological children. And you let him die never knowing the truth, Emma added, anger finally breaking through her shock. Dad died 5 years ago thinking we were his blood. You let him believe a lie. Patricia's composure finally cracked. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. He was your father in every way that mattered. He loved you more than anything in this world. Telling him the truth would have destroyed him, destroyed this family. Emma stood, the journal clutched against her chest like a shield. She needed air, needed space, needed to process the fact that her entire identity had just been rearranged like puzzle pieces that no longer fit together. There's something else, Patricia said through her tears. In the box. There's something else you need to see. Olivia reached into the shoebox with shaking hands, pulling out a sealed envelope. Emma's name and Olivia's name were written on the front, in unfamiliar handwriting. Neat, masculine, deliberate. What is this? Olivia asked. 3 months ago, Marcus Webb died, Patricia said quietly. He never married, never had other children. His lawyer contacted me. Apparently, Marcus always suspected. He'd done the math just like I had. Before he died, he wrote you each a letter. Emma's knees buckled, and she sank back onto the couch. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in her hands. Somewhere in Denver, a man they'd never met, a man who might be their biological father, had lived his entire life knowing he might have daughters, but never reaching out, never claiming them, until now, until death made his silence unbearable. Did his lawyer mention? Olivia's voice trailed off. A DNA test? Patricia finished. Yes. Marcus arranged for one before he died. He left samples with his lawyer. If you want to know for certain, the lawyer has all the information. Emma looked at her twin sister, seeing her own confusion, anger and grief reflected in Olivia's eyes. They'd come here for a birthday celebration, for cake and presents and the comfortable routine of family. Instead, they'd walked into a nightmare of lies, secrets, and impossible choices. The man who raised them wasn't their biological father. The man who might be had died 3 months ago, having watched them from a distance their entire lives. And their mother, the woman who'd tucked them in at night and kissed their scraped knees and taught them to be honest. She'd built their entire existence on a foundation of deception. Emma stood again, the letter clutched in one hand, the journal in the other. "I need to go." "Emma, please." Patricia reached for her, but Emma stepped back. "Don't. Just don't." Olivia was already moving toward the door, her face a mask of barely contained emotion. Emma followed her sister out into the October afternoon, leaving their mother alone in the house that suddenly felt like a stranger's home. They stood in the driveway, both too stunned to drive, too shattered to speak. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. "Are you going to open your letter?" Emma looked down at the envelope in her hand. Marcus Webb's handwriting. A dead man's final words to daughters he'd never claimed. "I don't know," Emma whispered. "Are you?" The living room had grown cold despite the autumn sun streaming through the windows. Emma clutched the journal in her hands, her fingers trembling as she turned to the second page. Olivia sat frozen beside her, her face drained of color, eyes fixed on their mother. Patricia had moved to the window, her back to her daughters, shoulders hunched as if bracing for impact. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. "Mom," Olivia finally spoke, her voice sharp. "You need to explain. Now." Patricia turned slowly, her eyes red-rimmed but dry. She'd cried all her tears years ago, Emma realized. This was a confession that had been rehearsed, perhaps in front of this very window, countless times. "Your father, Richard, we met when I was 26, Patricia began, settling back into the armchair with the careful movements of someone much older. He was 35, successful, charming. He worked in finance, made good money. I was a receptionist at his firm." Emma exchanged a glance with Olivia. They'd heard this story before, the romantic version of how their parents met. But now, knowing what the journal contained, every word felt tainted. "He didn't want marriage," Patricia continued. "He'd been clear about that from the beginning. But I was in love, desperately, foolishly in love, and I was terrified of losing him." She paused, her hands twisting in her lap. "He started talking about taking a position in London, a 2-year contract. He wanted me to come with him, but not as his wife, just as his companion. So you sabotaged your birth control," Emma said flatly. "I thought if I got pregnant, he'd have to marry me, have to stay." Patricia's voice cracked. "I know how it sounds. I know what I did was wrong, manipulative, but I was panicking. I couldn't lose him." Olivia stood abruptly, pacing to the mantel where their baby pictures stood in matching silver frames. "And it worked, didn't it? You got pregnant and he married you." "Yes." Patricia's whisper was barely audible. "We got married at City Hall in January 1997. He was angry, but he did the right thing, or what he thought was the right thing. He canceled London, bought this house, became the father you remember." Emma felt nauseous. The father she remembered had been loving, present, devoted. He'd coached their soccer teams, attended every school play, taught them to ride bikes in this very driveway. Had all of it been a lie? Had he resented them every day? "Did he know?" Emma asked. "Did Dad know what you did?" "No," Patricia said quickly. "I never told him. He thought it was an accident, a failure of birth control, which, I suppose, was technically true." "It was sabotage," Olivia spat, whirling around. "You sabotaged your own birth control to trap a man into marriage. That's not an accident, Mom. That's... I know what it is," Patricia interrupted, her voice firmer now. "I've lived with it every day for 28 years. I've had to look at you two, my beautiful daughters, and know that your existence began with my lie." Emma opened the journal again, flipping through pages filled with her mother's anxious handwriting. Entries about taking pregnancy tests, about telling Richard, about his initial anger that eventually transformed into resigned acceptance, about the wedding, small and quick, with no guests beyond 2 witnesses pulled from the street. But then, halfway through the journal, Emma found an entry that made her stop breathing. "March 15th, 1997, she read aloud, her voice shaking. The ultrasound confirmed it. Twins. The doctor says they're identical, which means they came from a single embryo that split. But the timing is wrong. I got pregnant the first month I stopped the pills, which means conception happened in early April. But Richard and we didn't. Oh God, what have I done?" The room spun. Emma looked up at her mother, whose face had gone completely white. "What does that mean?" Olivia demanded. "What is she talking about?" Patricia closed her eyes. a single tear sliding down her cheek. Richard wasn't your biological father. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Emma felt Olivia grab her arm, steadying them both. What? Olivia's voice was a whisper now. I was seeing someone else, Patricia said, the words tumbling out faster now, as if she needed to say them all before she lost courage. Just for a few weeks before I stopped my pills. Someone from my old neighborhood. It was casual, meaningless, and I ended it as soon as Richard and I became serious. But the timing, when I got pregnant so quickly, I realized. I counted back the days, and you didn't know which one of them was our father, Emma finished, her voice hollow. Patricia nodded. I prayed it was Richard. I convinced myself it had to be. The timing could have worked out, but then the ultrasound showed twins. Identical twins. And the dates. The conception date the doctor gave me. She broke off, pressing her hand to her mouth. Who was he? Emma heard herself ask. Who was the other man? His name was Marcus Webb. He was a mechanic. We grew up on the same street in Pilsen. Patricia's voice had gone distant, as if she were speaking about someone else's life. We'd known each other since we were kids. After I met Richard, Marcus and we reconnected at a mutual friend's wedding. It was brief, maybe 3 weeks. I ended it because I wanted to be with Richard, wanted the life Richard could give me. Did you ever tell him? Olivia's voice was ice. Did Marcus Webb ever know he might have children? Patricia shook her head. I couldn't. By the time I realized the timeline, Richard and I were already married, and I was 4 months pregnant. Marcus had moved to Denver for a job. I let him go without a word. Emma's mind reeled with the implications. Everything she'd believed about her family, her identity, her history, it was all built on lies. The man who'd raised them, who'd taught them to throw a baseball and helped with homework and walked them down the aisle at their high school father-daughter dance, he might not have been their biological father at all, and he'd never known. When did you find out for sure? Emma asked, her lawyer's mind automatically seeking facts, evidence, timeline. I never did, Patricia admitted. I was too afraid to do a paternity test. I thought if Richard ever suspected, if he ever questioned it, I could claim ignorance. But he never did. He looked at you two when you were born, and he fell in love. You became his daughters, and that was that. But you knew, Olivia said, her voice breaking. All these years, you knew we might not be his biological children. And you let him die never knowing the truth, Emma added, anger finally breaking through her shock. Dad died 5 years ago thinking we were his blood. You let him believe a lie. Patricia's composure finally cracked. She buried her face in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. He was your father in every way that mattered. He loved you more than anything in this world. Telling him the truth would have destroyed him. Destroyed this family. Emma stood, the journal clutched against her chest like a shield. She needed air, needed space, needed to process the fact that her entire identity had just been rearranged like puzzle pieces that no longer fit together. There's something else, Patricia said through her tears. In the box. There's something else you need to see. Olivia reached into the shoebox with shaking hands, pulling out a sealed envelope. Emma's name and Olivia's name were written on the front, in unfamiliar handwriting. Neat, masculine, deliberate. What is this? Olivia asked. 3 months ago, Marcus Webb died, Patricia said quietly. He never married, never had other children. His lawyer contacted me. Apparently, Marcus always suspected. He'd done the math just like I had. Before he died, he wrote you each a letter. Emma's knees buckled, and she sank back onto the couch. The envelope felt impossibly heavy in her hands. Somewhere in Denver, a man they'd never met, a man who might be their biological father, had lived his entire life knowing he might have daughters, but never reaching out, never claiming them, until now, until death made his silence unbearable. Did his lawyer mention... Olivia's voice trailed off. A DNA test? Patricia finished. Yes. Marcus arranged for one before he died. He left samples with his lawyer. If you want to know for certain, the lawyer has all the information. Emma looked at her twin sister, seeing her own confusion, anger, and grief reflected in Olivia's eyes. They'd come here for a birthday celebration, for cake and presents and the comfortable routine of family. Instead, they'd walked into a nightmare of lies, secrets, and impossible choices. The man who raised them wasn't their biological father. The man who might be had died 3 months ago, having watched them from a distance their entire lives. And their mother, the woman who'd tucked them in at night and kissed their scraped knees and taught them to be honest. She'd built their entire existence on a foundation of deception. Emma stood again, the letter clutched in one hand, the journal in the other. "I need to go. Emma, please." Patricia reached for her, but Emma stepped back. "Don't. Just don't." Olivia was already moving toward the door, her face a mask of barely contained emotion. Emma followed her sister out into the October afternoon, leaving their mother alone in the house that suddenly felt like a stranger's home. They stood in the driveway, both too stunned to drive, too shattered to speak. Finally, Olivia broke the silence. "Are you going to open your letter?" Emma looked down at the envelope in her hand. Marcus Webb's handwriting. A dead man's final words to daughters he'd never claimed. "I don't know," Emma whispered. "Are you?" Emma's apartment felt too quiet that evening. She'd been sitting on her couch for 3 hours, the unopened letter on the coffee table in front of her, her phone buzzing periodically with ignored calls from her mother. Olivia had texted twice, once when she got home, a simple, "I can't," and again an hour later, "Did you open yours?" Emma had responded, "Not yet." The city lights of Chicago twinkled through her floor-to-ceiling windows, the evening traffic creating a distant hum. Usually she found comfort in the urban soundtrack of her 10th-floor apartment. Tonight, it felt alien, like she'd woken up in someone else's life. Her phone rang again. This time, it was Olivia calling. "I'm coming over," Olivia said without preamble. "Don't open it without me." 20 minutes later, they sat side by side on Emma's gray sectional, 2 identical envelopes placed on the table before them. Emma had poured them each a glass of wine, though neither had touched it yet. "We don't have to do this tonight," Emma said, though she knew they both needed answers. "If we wait, we'll never do it," Olivia replied, her fingers already reaching for her envelope. "On 3? Emma nodded, picking up her own letter. The paper was expensive, the kind used for important documents. Marcus Webb had wanted these words to last. 1, Olivia counted. 2, Emma continued. 3. They tore open the envelope simultaneously. Inside each was a handwritten letter, several pages long, dated August 2024, just 3 months ago. Emma's hands shook as she unfolded the pages. "Dear Emma," she read aloud, her voice barely steady. Olivia had stopped to listen, her own letter clutched in her hands. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone. And Patricia finally told you the truth. I've thought about this moment for 28 years, imagined it, feared it, hoped for it. Now that it's here, I find I have too much to say and no idea how to say it. My name is Marcus Anthony Webb. I was born in Pilsen in 1968, grew up in a small house on 18th Street, and spent my childhood playing baseball in the park and helping my father fix cars in our garage. Your mother, Patricia, lived 3 blocks away. We were friends first, long before anything else. I won't pretend what happened between us was love. We were young, both a little lost, and we found comfort in familiarity during a few reckless weeks. She was involved with someone else, the man you knew as your father. I knew that. She was clear about where her heart was. When she ended things to pursue a serious relationship with Richard Turner, I understood. I moved to Denver for work, ready to start fresh. But then, months later, I did the math. I heard through mutual friends that Patricia had married Richard suddenly, that she was pregnant. The dates lined up too perfectly with our time together. I counted backwards from her due date, and my blood went cold. I tried to convince myself I was wrong, that the timing was coincidental, but I've always been good with numbers, and the numbers told a story Patricia probably didn't want told. I thought about reaching out. God knows I thought about it. I'd lie awake in my Denver apartment, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you were mine. Wondering if somewhere in Chicago, my daughter was being born, growing up, taking her first steps without me. But what right did I have? I wasn't Patricia's boyfriend when you were conceived. We were barely friends with benefits, as people say now. She'd made her choice. Richard Turner, a good man with a good job who could give her the life she wanted. Who was I to disrupt that? A mechanic with nothing to offer but questions that might destroy a family, so I stayed away. I built a life in Denver. I opened my own auto repair shop. I dated, though nothing ever lasted, and I watched from a distance. Yes, Emma, I watched. I hope that doesn't frighten you. I wasn't a stalker. I never showed up at your school or your home, but I had a private investigator send me updates every year on your birthday. Just photos, general information about how you were doing. I needed to know you were okay, that you were happy. that Richard Turner was being the father I couldn't be. The photos were my lifeline. I kept them in a box in my closet, and on hard nights, I'd take them out and study your faces. You and your sister, Olivia, identical twins. The investigators' reports mentioned how close you were, how you did everything together. I was grateful for that, grateful you had each other. I watched you grow from babies into toddlers, then into young girls. I saw photos of you in soccer uniforms, at school plays, at birthday parties. Your smile, Emma. You have my mother's smile. She died when I was 12, and seeing it on your face all these years, it broke my heart and healed it simultaneously. I saw you graduate high school, both of you at the top of your class. I saw you leave for college, different schools, the first time you'd ever been apart. I worried about that, wondered if you missed each other as much as I missed you both. When Richard Turner died 5 years ago, I almost came then. I saw his obituary, saw you and Olivia listed as his beloved daughters, and I thought maybe now there was room for truth, but I couldn't do it. He'd raised you, loved you, been your father in all the ways that mattered. Revealing the truth after his death would have dishonored his memory and hurt you both for no purpose other than my own selfish need to be acknowledged. So I continued to wait, and watch, and wonder. I saw you become a lawyer, Emma. The investigator sent me a photo of you on your first day at the firm, standing outside the building in your new suit, looking proud and terrified in equal measure. I hung that photo in my office at the shop. When customers asked who you were, I said you were my niece. It was the closest to the truth I could get. Last year, when I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, I knew my time was coming. The doctors gave me 6 months. I made it to 8. But I'm tired now, Emma. Tired of treatment. Tired of pain. Tired of keeping secrets. I decided then that you deserved to know. Not because I wanted to claim you or disrupt the memory of the father you lost, but because you're a grown woman now, and you have the right to know your own story, even the ugly parts. I've arranged for DNA samples to be available through my lawyer if you want confirmation. I think I'm your biological father, Emma. The timing, the genetics, it all points that way. But I'm not certain. And I never will be now. If you need that certainty, take the test. If you'd rather not know, then let this letter be goodbye. Either way, I want you to understand something. I don't regret staying away. Given the circumstances, given what Patricia and I were to each other, given Richard's role in your life, I made the only choice that made sense. But not a day went by that I didn't think about you. Not one single day. I've set up a trust fund for you and Olivia. It's not much. A mechanic's savings, but it's yours. My lawyer will handle the details. I've also left you some items from my mother, your grandmother, photos, jewelry, her recipe book. I thought you might want to know something about where you came from, even if I can't be there to tell you in person. I'm sorry, Emma. I'm sorry I wasn't strong enough to tell Patricia I suspected. I'm sorry I watched from a distance instead of fighting to be part of your life. I'm sorry I'm taking the coward's way out, leaving you this letter instead of facing you with the truth while I was alive. But most of all, I'm sorry I never got to know you. I'm sorry I never got to hear your voice, or your laugh, or your thoughts on anything at all. You were a ghost to me, Emma. A beautiful, brilliant ghost I could see but never touch. I hope you have a good life. I hope you find love and happiness and all the things I never quite managed for myself. I hope Olivia is well too. Take care of each other. From what I could see, you two have something special. Something rare. Hold on to it. If there's an afterlife, and if I'm lucky enough to get there, maybe I'll finally get to meet you properly. Until then, know that somewhere in Denver, a man you never knew loved you from afar for your entire life, with more affection than I ever earned the right to express. Marcus Anthony Webb. Emma's vision blurred with tears by the time she finished reading. Beside her, Olivia was openly crying, her own letter clutched against her chest. Mine says almost the same thing, Olivia whispered. He talks about my photography, about a picture that won an award in high school. He kept a copy of it in his shop. They sat in silence, the weight of Marcus Webb's words settling around them like snow. Emma thought about the man who'd written these letters, a lonely mechanic in Denver, collecting photos of daughters he'd never met, building a life around a hole he couldn't fill. Do we take the test? Olivia finally asked. Emma looked at her twin, seeing the same confusion she felt reflected in those familiar green eyes. Part of her didn't want to know, wanted to preserve the memory of Richard Turner as their father, unquestioned and uncomplicated. But another part, The lawyer part, the part that needed facts and evidence, had to know the truth. I think we have to, Emma said quietly. We've come this far. Not knowing would be worse than knowing. Olivia nodded slowly. Mom's been calling me. Me too. Are you going to talk to her? Emma thought about Patricia, alone in that house, probably still sitting in the same chair where they'd left her hours ago. She'd been carrying this secret for 28 years, and Emma couldn't imagine the weight of it, but she also couldn't forgive it. Not yet. Eventually, Emma said, but not tonight. Tonight, I need to process the fact that some stranger in Denver loved us enough to spend his life watching from a distance while our mother built her entire family on a lie. He wasn't a stranger, Olivia said softly. Not really. He was our father. Maybe not in the legal sense, maybe not in the day-to-day sense, but, Emma, he loved us. You read the letter. He loved us. Emma closed her eyes, letting the tears fall freely now. I know, and that makes it so much worse. Because Dad, Richard, he loved us too. He was our father in every way that mattered, and he never knew he might not be our biological parent. How do we honor both of them? How do we grieve for a man we never met while still loving the man who raised us? I don't know, Olivia admitted, but we figure it out together. That's what we've always done. Emma reached for her sister's hand, squeezing tightly. Whatever came next, DNA tests, conversations with their mother, processing the reality of their complicated parentage, they'd face it as they'd faced everything else in their lives, together. The letters from Marcus Webb sat on the coffee table between them, a dead man's confession and apology, proof that love existed in many forms, that fatherhood was more than biology, that secrets had a way of demanding to be told, even from beyond the grave. 2 weeks had passed since the birthday that changed everything. Emma sat in her corner office at Klein & Associates, 23 floors above the Chicago Loop, but her mind was miles away in a laboratory in suburban Skokie, where her DNA sample had been sent alongside Olivia's, and the posthumous sample from Marcus Webb. The process had been simple, almost anticlimactically so. A cheek swab rubbed against the inside of her mouth, sealed in a sterile tube, and mailed off to determine the fundamental truth of her identity. The lab had promised results within 7 to 10 business days. Today was day 9. Her phone buzzed on the mahogany desk. Olivia's name flashed on the screen. They called, Olivia said without greeting, her voice tight. The results are ready. We can pick them up after 5. Emma's stomach clenched. She'd spent the last 2 weeks in a strange limbo, oscillating between wanting to know immediately and wishing she'd never opened that journal. Work had been her refuge. Depositions, contract reviews, anything to keep her mind occupied. But now the moment of truth had arrived, and she felt completely unprepared. Okay, Emma managed. I'll meet you there at 5:30. The afternoon crawled by with excruciating slowness. Emma tried to focus on a merger agreement that needed review, but the words blurred together on her computer screen. By 4 o'clock, she gave up, packed her briefcase, and left the office early for the first time in years. The drive to Skokie took 40 minutes in rush-hour traffic, giving Emma too much time to think. What would change if Marcus Webb was their biological father? Richard Turner had been Dad, the man who'd taught her to ride a bike, who'd sat through countless soccer games, who'd helped her study for the LSAT. Did DNA erase all of that? But Marcus had loved them too, in his own way. He'd watched from a distance, collected photos, kept them in his heart for 28 years. That kind of love, quiet, sacrificial, unacknowledged, deserved recognition, didn't it? Olivia was already waiting in the parking lot when Emma arrived, leaning against her Subaru with her arms wrapped around herself despite the mild November weather. She looked thinner than she had 2 weeks ago, her face drawn with sleepless nights that Emma understood all too well. Ready? Olivia asked as Emma approached. No, Emma admitted, but let's do it anyway. The DNA Diagnostics Center occupied a nondescript suite in a medical building. The waiting room was sterile and impersonal. Beige walls, generic landscape paintings, chairs upholstered in that special shade of blue-gray that existed only in medical facilities. A receptionist with kind eyes directed them to a private consultation room. Dr. Sarah Chen, the genetic counselor who'd coordinated their testing, entered a few minutes later carrying a manila folder. She was in her early 40s, with black hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and the calm, measured demeanor of someone who regularly delivered life-changing information. Emma, Olivia, Dr. Chen greeted them, settling into a chair across from where they sat on a small couch. Thank you for coming in. I wanted to deliver these results in person. and answer any questions you might have. Emma's hands were clenched so tightly in her lap that her fingernails bit into her palms. Beside her, Olivia had gone completely still. The DNA analysis examined 20 genetic markers using short tandem repeat technology, Dr. Chen explained, opening the folder. This is the gold standard for paternity testing, with an accuracy rate exceeding 99.9%. Just tell us, Olivia interrupted, her voice strained. Was Marcus Webb our biological father? Dr. Chen's expression softened with compassion. Yes. Based on the genetic markers analyzed, Marcus Anthony Webb is confirmed as the biological father of both Emma and Olivia Turner, with a probability of paternity of 99.99%. The room seemed to tilt. Emma heard the words, understood them intellectually, but couldn't quite process what they meant. Richard Turner, Dad, wasn't her biological father. A mechanic from Denver who'd died 3 months ago, a man she'd never met, had contributed half of her DNA. Because you're identical twins, you share the same DNA, Dr. Chen continued gently. You came from a single embryo that split early in development, which means you both have the same biological parents. There's no possibility of different paternity. So our mother lied to our father, to Richard, for our entire lives, Emma said flatly. The words tasted bitter. I can't speak to the family dynamics, Dr. Chen said carefully, but I can tell you that this situation is more common than people realize. Many families carry secrets about parentage, and discovering them can be emotionally complex. Complex, Olivia repeated with a hollow laugh. That's one word for it. Dr. Chen slid 2 copies of the full report across the table. These documents include detailed analysis of all genetic markers tested. You're welcome to have them reviewed by another geneticist if you'd like confirmation, though I assure you the results are conclusive. Emma picked up her copy with trembling hands. The pages were filled with charts, numbers, genetic sequences, scientific proof that her entire identity had been built on a foundation of lies. Each matched marker was highlighted in yellow, 20 points of genetic concordance that definitively established Marcus Webb as their father. What do we do now? Olivia asked, and Emma realized her sister was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. That's entirely up to you, Dr. Chen said gently. Some people in your situation choose to learn more about their biological parent, family history, medical information, personality traits. Marcus Webb's attorney indicated there are personal effects and family documents available to you if you're interested. We have his letters, Emma heard herself say. He wrote to us before he died. Dr. Chen nodded. That's a gift many people in similar situations never receive. It might help in processing this information to know that he acknowledged you, even if only at the end. The genetic counselor spent another 20 minutes with them, discussing the psychological impacts of discovering unexpected paternity, providing resources for therapy specializing in family secrets and identity issues, and answering clinical questions about genetic inheritance. But Emma barely heard her. Her mind was stuck on a single thought. Every time Richard Turner had looked at her, had he seen traces of another man? Had there been moments when he'd wondered, when doubt had flickered across his face? Or had his love been so complete, so unquestioning, that it had never occurred to him to doubt? They left the clinic as dusk settled over the Chicago suburbs, the November sky streaked with purple and orange. Neither spoke until they reached their cars. I need to see Mom, Olivia said suddenly. I need to hear her explain how she could do this, how she could let Dad die never knowing the truth. Emma's first instinct was to refuse, to go home to her apartment and process this information alone. But Olivia was right. They needed answers that only Patricia could provide. Okay, Emma agreed. Let's go. The drive to Naperville felt like traveling through a tunnel. Emma followed Olivia's taillights, the familiar route that led to their childhood home taking on an ominous quality. When they pulled into the driveway, the house was lit from within, warm light spilling from the windows into the gathering darkness. Patricia must have been watching for them, because the front door opened before they even reached the porch. Their mother stood in the doorway, backlit by the hall light, her posture tense with anticipation and dread. You got the results, Patricia said. It wasn't a question. Marcus Webb was our biological father, Emma stated, holding up the manila folder. 99.99% certainty. You knew, didn't you? All these years, you knew. Patricia's face crumpled. She stepped back into the house, and they followed her to the same living room where this nightmare had begun 2 weeks ago. The birthday decorations had been cleared away, but the shoebox of secrets still sat on the coffee table, as if Patricia had been revisiting it daily. "I suspected," Patricia whispered, sinking into her chair. "The timing was too coincidental, but I told myself it could have been Richard. I needed it to be Richard, but it wasn't," Olivia said, her voice hard. "Our entire childhood was a lie. Every family dinner, every holiday, every time Dad said he was proud of us. It was all based on a lie you told. He was your father," Patricia insisted fiercely. "Biology doesn't make someone a parent. Richard Turner was your father in every way that mattered. He loved you more than his own life, and you stole his right to know the truth," Emma shot back. "You let him die believing we were his biological daughters. How could you do that to him? How could you do that to us?" Patricia's composure finally shattered completely. She buried her face in her hands, her whole body shaking with sobs. "Because I was afraid. Every day for 28 years I was terrified that somehow the truth would come out, that I'd lose you all, that everything I'd built would collapse. So you built it on lies instead," Olivia said. "That's so much better." Emma paced to the mantel, where their family photos still stood in their frames. Here was a picture of Richard holding both newborn twins, his face radiant with joy and wonder. There was the four of them at Disney World, Emma and Olivia wearing matching mouse ears. Christmas morning, kindergarten graduation, high school prom. A lifetime of memories captured on film, all of them shadowed now by the knowledge of Patricia's deception. "Did you ever think about telling him?" Emma asked quietly, studying a photo of Richard teaching them to ride bikes. "In all those years, did you ever consider coming clean?" "Every day," Patricia admitted, "especially after you were born and I saw how much he loved you. But the longer I waited, the harder it became. How do you tell your husband of 5 years that his daughters might not be his? How do you tell your 10-year-old girls that their father might not be their biological parent? When would have been the right time?" "Before he died," Emma said, turning to face her mother. "You could have told him before he died, Mom. You could have given him the choice to know the truth. And what would that have accomplished except breaking his heart?" Patricia's voice rose in desperation. "He was dying of cancer, in so much pain. Was I supposed to use his last weeks to tell him that everything he believed about his family was a lie? How would that have been merciful?" Silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. Emma understood her mother's reasoning, could even see the twisted logic in it, but understanding didn't equal forgiveness. "Marcus Webb knew," Olivia said softly. "He figured it out and spent 28 years watching us from a distance. He never got to be our father because of your choices, Mom. He died alone in Denver, never having met the daughters he loved enough to let go." "I know," Patricia whispered. "I've thought about Marcus every year on your birthday. I've wondered if he suspected, if he knew. Part of me hoped he'd figured it out, that he'd contact me, force my hand. But he never did. He was a good man, Marcus. Better than I deserved." Emma returned to the couch, suddenly exhausted. The anger that had sustained her for the past 2 weeks was draining away, leaving behind only a profound sadness for all of them. For Marcus Webb, who'd loved from afar. For Richard Turner, who'd been deceived. For their mother, who'd imprisoned herself in lies. And for her and Olivia, who'd lost one father to death and another to circumstances beyond their control. "What do we do now?" Emma asked, echoing Olivia's earlier question to Dr. Chen. "How do we move forward from this?" Patricia looked at her daughters with red-rimmed eyes. "That's up to you. I know I've lost your trust, maybe permanently. I know you may never forgive me. But please believe that everything I did, every lie I told, came from a place of trying to protect our family." "You protected your lie," Olivia corrected. "That's not the same thing as protecting us." "I know," Patricia said. "I know that now." Emma stood, clutching the DNA results to her chest. "I need time. We both do. Time to process this, to figure out who we are now that everything we believed about our family has changed." "I understand," Patricia said quietly. "Take all the time you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk." As they walked back to their cars, Olivia grabbed Emma's arm. "Marcus Webb's attorney. Dr. Chen said there were personal effects, family documents. Do you want to see them?" Emma looked up at the November sky, where stars were beginning to appear in the darkening blue. Somewhere up there, maybe Richard Turner and Marcus Webb existed in whatever came after, finally able to acknowledge each other, to share the daughters they'd both loved in their own ways. "Yes," Emma said. "I want to know everything about him. He deserves that much from us." The law offices of Patterson and Rodriguez occupied the 15th floor of a modern building in downtown Denver. with panoramic views of the Rocky Mountains stretching across the western horizon. Emma and Olivia sat in a conference room with leather chairs and a polished oak table, waiting to meet the attorney who'd handled Marcus Webb's final affairs. It had taken 3 weeks to arrange the trip, time to process the DNA results, to have difficult conversations with their mother, and to simply breathe through the emotional upheaval that had consumed their lives. Emma had taken personal leave from her firm for the first time in her career, and Olivia had postponed 2 photography assignments. Some things were more important than work. The door opened, and a woman in her early 60s entered, extending her hand. "Emma, Olivia, I'm Rebecca Patterson. Thank you for making the trip from Chicago." Rebecca had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the calm, professional demeanor of someone who'd spent decades helping people navigate grief and inheritance. She settled across from them, placing a thick file folder on the table. "First, let me say how sorry I am for your loss," Rebecca began. "Marcus was a client of mine for 15 years, and more than that, he was a friend. He was a good man who carried a heavy burden for a long time." "How much did you know?" Emma asked. "About us? About the situation?" "Everything," Rebecca admitted. "Marcus came to me about 5 years ago, after your father, Richard Turner, passed away. He'd been considering reaching out to you then, but ultimately decided against it. Instead, he had me hire the private investigator whose reports he'd been receiving. He wanted to make sure the information was current, accurate." Olivia's hands tightened on the armrests. "He was watching us even after our dad died? Not watching in a predatory sense," Rebecca clarified gently. "Marcus was trying to honor Richard Turner's role as your father, while also keeping informed about your welfare. When he was diagnosed with cancer last year, he made the decision to finally tell you the truth. He felt you deserved to know where you came from, even if he couldn't be there to explain it in person." She opened the file folder, revealing documents, photographs, and several small boxes. "Marcus left you both a trust fund. Not substantial, but meaningful. He also wanted you to have personal items from his life and from your grandmother, his mother, Elena Webb." Rebecca began placing items on the table. First came photographs, dozens of them, organized in chronological order. Emma's breath caught as she recognized herself and Olivia throughout the years, captured in images they'd never known existed. "These are copies," Rebecca explained. "The investigator sent them to Marcus on your birthdays. He kept them in his apartment, in albums he labeled my daughters." Emma picked up a photo of herself and Olivia at age 7, standing in their soccer uniforms after a game. She remembered that day. Richard had taken them for ice cream afterward to celebrate Olivia's winning goal. Now, knowing that somewhere in Denver, Marcus Webb had received the same image and studied their faces, trying to know his daughters through frozen moments in time, it broke something in her chest. "He really loved us," Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face as she looked through the images. "Even though he never met us, he really loved us." More than anything," Rebecca confirmed. "He talked about you constantly, especially in those last months. He'd share updates about your lives like a proud father. When you won that photography award, Olivia, he brought the article to my office and made everyone read it. And Emma, when you made junior partner at your firm, he took us all out to dinner to celebrate." Emma's vision blurred with tears. Marcus Webb had celebrated her achievements, mourned from afar when she'd gone through her difficult divorce 3 years ago, worried about her and Olivia just as any father would, and she'd never known he existed. Rebecca continued placing items on the table. A velvet jewelry box containing a gold locket that had belonged to Elena Webb. Inside were 2 tiny photographs, a young Marcus, maybe 5 years old, and Elena as a young woman, beautiful and smiling. "Your grandmother," Rebecca said. "She died when Marcus was 12. He always said you had her smile, Emma. And Olivia, you have her artistic eye. Elena was a talented painter, though she never pursued it professionally. There was Elena's recipe book, handwritten pages yellowed with age but still legible. Traditional Mexican dishes passed down through generations. Tamales, mole, pozole, notes in the margins about family gatherings, about Marcus's favorite meals as a child. Your heritage," Rebecca explained. "Marcus was half Mexican through his mother's side. His father, your grandfather Thomas Webb, was Irish-American. Marcus grew up bilingual, speaking Spanish and English at home." The revelation struck Emma with unexpected force. She'd grown up thinking she was simply white, European descent through both parents. Now she learned she carried Mexican heritage she'd never known about, a culture that should have been part of her identity, but had been erased by circumstances and secrets. "There's more," Rebecca said, pulling out a leather-bound journal similar to the one Patricia had given them. "Marcus kept a journal for the last 5 years after Richard Turner died. He wrote in it whenever he received updates about you. He wanted you to understand his perspective, his choices. It's difficult to read at times. He was brutally honest about his regrets and his loneliness." Emma accepted the journal with trembling hands. The first entry was dated 6 months after Richard's death. The investigator sent photos from Richard Turner's funeral. "My daughters, and I can finally call them mine, even if only in this journal, look devastated. I wanted to be there, to offer comfort, to tell them they weren't alone. But what right did I have? I'm a stranger who shares their DNA, but nothing else. Richard Turner earned the title of father through 28 years of love and presence. I'm just the man who watched from a distance." Rebecca gave them time to absorb the items, the revelations, the weight of Marcus's lifelong vigil. Finally, she pulled out one last document, a trust fund statement. "Marcus established a trust for each of you 5 years ago. He contributed regularly from his business earnings. The total for each of you is approximately $180,000. Olivia looked up sharply. That's a lot of money for a mechanic." "Marcus owned his auto repair shop free and clear," Rebecca explained. "He lived modestly, saved aggressively, and invested wisely. He wanted to provide for you in the only way he could, financially. The terms of the trust specify that the funds are yours to use as you see fit. No strings attached." Emma stared at the document, seeing not just numbers, but the sacrifice behind them. Marcus Webb had denied himself luxuries, had saved and invested and planned, all for daughters he'd never met. He'd loved them in the only way available to him, from a distance, in silence, with a generosity that transcended presence. "Why didn't he fight for us?" Olivia asked suddenly, her voice breaking. "If he suspected we were his, why didn't he demand a paternity test? Why didn't he contact our mother, or Richard, or us?" Rebecca's expression filled with compassion. "He explained his reasoning in the journal, but I can summarize. Marcus believed that disrupting your family would cause more harm than good. Patricia had made her choice. Richard Turner. They were married, building a life together. Marcus felt that inserting himself into that situation would be selfish, that it would hurt you and potentially destroy your parents' marriage. So he sacrificed his own happiness for ours," Emma said quietly. "Yes. He believed that children need stability more than they need biological truth. He thought you were better off with Richard Turner as your father, a man who wanted you, who was present, who could provide a stable home. Marcus saw himself as incidental, a genetic contributor, but not a father in the ways that mattered." The word echoed in Emma's mind. Incidental. As if his DNA, his love, his years of watching and waiting meant nothing. But it did mean something. It meant everything. "Can we see where he lived?" Olivia asked. "His apartment? His shop?" Rebecca nodded. "I anticipated you'd want that. His apartment is still in his estate. We haven't cleared it yet. And his business partner, Jose Ramirez, still runs the auto shop. He'd be honored to meet you." They spent another hour with Rebecca, reviewing financial documents, asking questions about Marcus's life, and slowly piecing together the man who'd been their biological father. He'd enjoyed classic cars and Cubs baseball. He'd volunteered at a youth center teaching underprivileged kids basic auto mechanics. He'd been known for his integrity in business, his loyalty to friends, and his quiet generosity. Later that afternoon, Rebecca drove them to a modest apartment complex on the outskirts of Denver. Marcus's unit was on the second floor, a simple 2-bedroom space that felt frozen in time. The furniture was practical but comfortable, the walls decorated with automotive posters and photographs, including prominently displayed pictures of Emma and Olivia throughout the years. "This is Shrine," Olivia whispered, standing in front of a wall where Marcus had created a timeline of their lives. Baby photos, school pictures, soccer team shots, prom, college graduation, career milestones, all arranged chronologically, a father's gallery created from a distance. Emma moved through the apartment, touching Marcus's belongings with reverent curiosity. His coffee mug, unwashed, still sat by the sink. His bed was made with military precision. In his closet, she found shirts pressed and hanging neatly, and on the top shelf, 3 photo albums labeled Emma, Olivia, and Both. She pulled down the album labeled Both and opened it. Every page was filled with pictures of the twins together, at birthday parties, on vacations, at family gatherings. Marcus had specifically requested photos that showed Emma and Olivia together, capturing the bond between them that he could observe but never be part of. He was so alone, Emma said, her voice breaking. He lived in this apartment by himself, with no one but us on these walls, and we didn't even know he existed. Olivia joined her, looking at the albums with tears streaming down her face. We could have known him, Emma. If Mom had been honest, if she'd told Richard the truth, maybe there could have been a way. Maybe Marcus could have been part of our lives in some capacity. But would we have wanted that? Emma asked, forcing herself to confront the difficult question. If we'd known as children that Richard Turner might not be our biological father, would we have embraced Marcus? Or would we have resented him as an intruder, a threat to our family? It was an impossible question, one that would never have an answer. But standing in Marcus Webb's apartment, surrounded by evidence of his love and his loneliness, Emma felt the full weight of the tragedy, not just for them, but for him. He died alone, never having heard them call him Dad, never having embraced them, never having been acknowledged as their father. They spent hours in the apartment, reading through Marcus's journal, examining his belongings, and trying to know the man who'd given them life, but never gotten to live it with them. The journal was painful to read, pages filled with longing, regret, and a deep, abiding love that had nowhere to go. One entry, written 6 months before his death, particularly struck Emma. I'm dying, and I find myself thinking about all the moments I missed. I never got to teach Emma to drive, or help Olivia with her first camera. I never got to walk them down the aisle, or hold my grandchildren if they choose to have them. I never got to tell them I loved them, to hear them say it back. Richard Turner got all of that, and I can't even be angry about it because he deserved it. He was there. He was the father they needed. But God, it hurts to know I'll die having never touched their faces, never heard their laughter in person, never known what it felt like to be Dad instead of just a name on a DNA test. Emma closed the journal, unable to read more. The grief she felt was complicated, layered. Grief for Marcus, for the father she'd lost in Richard, for the complicated mess her mother had created, and for the innocence of a childhood that had been built on lies, even as it had been filled with genuine love. We should visit his grave, Olivia said quietly. Before we go back to Chicago, we should at least do that. Emma nodded, clutching Marcus's journal to her chest. It was the least they could do for the man who'd loved them from afar, who'd sacrificed his own happiness for theirs, who'd died carrying the secret of their shared DNA to his grave, until he'd finally found the courage to let them know the truth. As they left the apartment, Emma turned back one last time, looking at the gallery of photographs on Marcus Webb's wall, 2 daughters he'd never met, but whom he'd loved with every fiber of his being. Goodbye, Marcus, she whispered. We wish we'd known you. The Denver morning arrived cold and clear, frost glistening on the windshield of their rental car. Emma and Olivia had spent the night in a hotel near Marcus's apartment, neither sleeping much, both processing the profound revelations of the previous day. Now they drove in silence through the city streets toward Riverside Cemetery, where Marcus Webb had been buried 3 months earlier. Rebecca Patterson had offered to accompany them, but they'd declined. This felt like something they needed to do alone, just the 2 of them. The daughters Marcus had watched from afar for 28 years, finally coming to acknowledge him. The cemetery sprawled across gentle hills on the western edge of Denver, mature trees providing shade in summer and stark beauty in winter. Emma parked near the administrative office, where they'd been told they could get directions to Marcus's grave. A groundskeeper with weathered hands and kind eyes pointed them toward Section D, Row 12. They walked in silence, their breath visible in the cold November air. Around them, headstones marked the final resting places of strangers, lives lived, loved ones left behind, stories ending in this quiet place. There, Olivia said, her voice catching. The headstone was simple gray granite, modest but dignified. It read, Marcus Anthony Webb, 1968-2024. Beloved son, friend, and father. Love endures from a distance. Emma's knees buckled, and she sank to the cold ground in front of the grave. Father. Marcus had claimed them on his headstone, had used his final monument to acknowledge the daughters he'd never been able to claim in life. He put us on his grave, Olivia whispered, tears streaming down her face. Even though we never knew him, even though we couldn't be at his funeral, he claimed us as his daughters. Emma traced her fingers over the engraved letters, feeling the permanence of stone, the weight of acknowledgement. For 28 years, Marcus had existed in their lives only as an absence, an unknown. Now, kneeling at his grave, Emma finally understood the magnitude of his sacrifice. "I'm sorry," Emma said aloud, her voice breaking. "I'm sorry we didn't know you. I'm sorry we couldn't be here when you died. I'm sorry you spent your whole life loving us from a distance instead of being able to be our dad." Olivia knelt beside her sister, placing a hand on the cold headstone. "We would have loved you," she said softly. "If we'd known you existed, if circumstances had been different, we would have loved you. You didn't have to stay away. You didn't have to sacrifice your happiness for ours." But even as she said it, Emma knew it wasn't that simple. Marcus had made impossible choices in an impossible situation. He'd believed, rightly or wrongly, that disrupting their family would cause more harm than his absence. He'd chosen to love them from the shadows, rather than risk damaging the life Patricia had built for them with Richard Turner. "What do we do now?" Olivia asked, echoing the question that had haunted them since their birthday. "How do we move forward?" Emma looked at her twin, seeing her own grief and confusion reflected in those familiar green eyes. Eyes they'd inherited from Marcus, she now realized. Eyes that had looked out at the world through 3 generations, carrying forward genetics, and perhaps something more intangible: resilience, love, the capacity for sacrifice. "We honor them both," Emma said finally. "Richard and Marcus. They both loved us in different ways, under different circumstances. Richard was our father in every way that mattered. He raised us, taught us, loved us every single day. But Marcus was our father too. He gave us life, and he loved us the only way he could." "But Mom," Olivia started. "Mom made terrible choices," Emma interrupted. "Selfish, destructive choices that affected everyone involved. But she also gave us a good childhood. She loved us. She built a family, even if it was built on lies. I don't know if I can forgive her yet, but I can try to understand her." They sat at Marcus's grave for a long time, talking to him the way they'd never gotten to in life. Emma told him about her career, about the satisfaction of winning a difficult case, about her failed marriage and her hope for future love. Olivia shared her passion for photography, how she tried to capture authentic moments of human connection, how maybe that drive came from him, from his lifetime of observing from a distance. Eventually, Olivia pulled out her camera. She'd brought it instinctively, the way she always did. She photographed Marcus's headstone, the frost-touched grass around it, the bare branches of a nearby oak tree reaching toward the gray sky, creating a visual record of this moment, this place, this acknowledgement. "We should visit his shop," Emma said as they finally stood to leave. "Meet his partner, see where he spent his days." Webb's Auto Repair occupied a corner lot in a working-class neighborhood, a modest building with 3 service bays and a small office. The sign, hand-painted years ago, showed its age, but had been lovingly maintained. A bell chimed as they entered, and a man in his 60s looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face breaking into a complicated expression of joy and sadness. "You're Emma and Olivia," he said, coming around the counter. "I'm Jose Ramirez, Marcus's partner for 23 years. "You knew about us," Emma said. "I knew everything," Jose confirmed, his accent carrying traces of his Mexican heritage. "Marcus and I, we were like brothers. He showed me your pictures, told me about your lives. He was so proud of you both." Jose led them through the shop, showing them Marcus's workspace, tools arranged with meticulous care, a Cubs pennant on the wall, and in a small frame on his toolbox, a photo of Emma and Olivia at their college graduation. "He talked about you constantly," Jose said, smiling through tears. "Every birthday, every holiday, he'd show me new pictures. When you got divorced, Emma, he was heartbroken for you. When your photography won that award, Olivia, he bought champagne, and we drank to your success." Emma's throat tightened. Marcus had been present in their lives in a way they'd never known, celebrating their victories and mourning their losses from hundreds of miles away. "Why didn't he contact us?" Olivia asked. "After Richard died, why didn't he reach out?" Jose's expression grew somber. "He wanted to. God, he wanted to. But Marcus believed your father, Richard, deserved to remain your father, even in death. He thought revealing the truth would taint your memories of the man who raised you. He decided to wait until you were older, more established in your lives, before telling you the truth. And then he got sick," Emma said quietly. "And then he got sick," Jose confirmed. "The cancer was aggressive. He had maybe 8 months from diagnosis to death. He spent those months writing your letters, arranging the trust funds, making sure you'd know the truth after he was gone. He said it was the only gift he could give you. Honesty, even if it came too late. They spent 2 hours with Jose, listening to stories about Marcus, his terrible jokes, his generosity with struggling customers, his skill with engines, his quiet faith. Jose showed them the business ledger where Marcus had documented charitable work, fixing cars for free for single mothers and elderly customers on fixed incomes. He was a good man, Jose said as they prepared to leave. He made a hard choice, staying out of your lives. I'm not sure it was the right choice, but it was made out of love, not cowardice. I hope you can remember that. The flight back to Chicago that evening felt surreal. Emma and Olivia sat side by side, both lost in thought, processing the whirlwind of the past month. Everything they'd believed about their family, their identity, their origins, had been upended and reconstructed into something more complicated, but perhaps more honest. "We need to talk to Mom," Emma said as the plane climbed through the clouds. "Really talk to her. I don't know if I can forgive her yet, but we need to try to understand." Olivia nodded. "And we need to decide how to honor Marcus. His grave says father, but no one except us and Jose knows that's true. Do we tell people? Do we acknowledge him publicly?" It was a question without easy answers. But Emma realized that perhaps there didn't need to be easy answers. Life was complicated. Love was complicated. Family was complicated. Richard Turner had been their father, and so had Marcus Webb. Both had loved them completely, in vastly different ways, under impossible circumstances. 3 days later, Emma and Olivia returned to their childhood home in Naperville. Patricia answered the door looking older than she had just a month ago, stress and guilt aging her visibly. But there was also hope in her eyes, a tentative question that Emma answered with a small nod. They gathered in the living room where this had all begun, but this time the atmosphere was different. Not the shock and anger of that birthday revelation, but a tentative willingness to begin the difficult process of healing. "We met Jose," Emma said. "Marcus's business partner, and we saw Marcus's apartment, his grave, his life." Patricia's hands trembled in her lap. What was it like?" "Lonely," Olivia said bluntly. "He spent 28 years alone because of choices you made, Mom. He loved us from a distance when he should have been able to love us in person." "I know," Patricia whispered. "I've thought about Marcus every day since you were born. I've wondered if I made the right choice, if I should have been honest from the beginning. But I was scared. Scared of losing Richard. Scared of losing you girls. Scared of destroying the family I'd built." "You built it on lies," Emma said, but her voice was gentler than it had been before. "But you also loved us. You and Dad. Richard, you gave us a good childhood. You were present, involved, loving parents." "That matters too. Richard was your father in every way that counted," Patricia said, tears streaming down her face. "Biology doesn't make someone a parent. Presence does. Love does. Commitment does. Richard chose you every single day, and I hope knowing the truth doesn't diminish what he was to you." "It doesn't," Olivia assured her. "Dad will always be our dad, but Marcus was our father too. We're going to honor both of them, acknowledge both of them. That's not a betrayal of either one. It's the truth." The conversation lasted hours, tears flowing freely as Patricia explained her reasoning, her regrets, her justifications. It wasn't easy, and forgiveness didn't come quickly, but it was a beginning, a tentative step toward rebuilding trust that had been shattered by decades of deception. "I've set up a trust with the money Marcus left us," Emma explained. "A scholarship fund for students pursuing careers in automotive technology, in Marcus's name, and we're commissioning a memorial bench at the youth center where he volunteered. We want his legacy to be more than secrets and sacrifice." Patricia's face crumpled with emotion. "He would have loved that. He would have been so proud of you both." "We're also making changes to Richard's headstone," Olivia added, adding, "Beloved father of Emma and Olivia Turner. We want to make sure there's no question that he was our father, that nothing we discover about our biology changes that fact." 6 months later, Emma stood in Chicago's Lincoln Park, surrounded by friends, family, and several members of the automotive community that Marcus had been part of. A small crowd had gathered for the dedication of a memorial bench overlooking the lake, a bronze plaque reading, "In memory of Marcus Anthony Webb, 1968-2024, who taught us that love endures, even from a distance. Father, friend, mentor. Jose had flown in from Denver, bringing with him several of Marcus's oldest friends and loyal customers. Patricia stood off to the side, her presence a complicated addition that Emma and Olivia had debated before ultimately agreeing she should be there. This was part of their story, too. All of them. Marcus, Richard, Patricia, Emma, and Olivia, tangled together in a web of choices, consequences, and love. Emma stepped forward to speak, Olivia beside her, presenting a united front as they always had. "We're here to honor Marcus Webb," Emma began, her voice steady despite the emotion choking her throat. "A man most of you knew as a skilled mechanic, a generous friend, and a quiet presence in your lives. What you might not have known is that Marcus was also a father, our father. He loved us from a distance for 28 years, watching us grow, celebrating our successes, and mourning our struggles without ever being able to claim us as his daughters." She felt Olivia's hand slip into hers, squeezing tight. "We grew up believing Richard Turner was our biological father, and in every way that mattered, he was. He was the man who raised us, loved us, taught us to be who we are today. But we've learned that family is more complicated than biology, that fatherhood can exist in multiple forms, and that love can endure even when it must remain silent." Olivia took over, her photographer's eye having captured this moment before it happened, knowing she'd need to preserve it. Marcus Webb made an impossible choice. He chose to stay out of our lives, believing that his presence would cause more harm than his absence. We'll never know if that was the right choice, but we know it was made with love. He gave us the gift of stability, of an uncomplicated childhood with a father who adored us. And then, at the end of his life, he gave us the gift of truth. The ceremony concluded with Jose sharing memories of Marcus, with Olivia reading passages from Marcus's journal, and with Emma announcing the scholarship fund that would help other young people pursue the career Marcus had loved. As the small crowd dispersed, Emma found herself standing before the bench, imagining Marcus sitting here, looking out at the lake, perhaps thinking of the daughters he'd never meet. "We're okay," Emma said aloud, knowing somehow that he could hear her. "We're figuring it out, and we're going to make sure your love wasn't in vain. We're going to make sure people know that you were our father, that you loved us, that you mattered." Patricia approached hesitantly, standing a few feet away. The distance between them was still vast. Trust was being rebuilt slowly, through therapy sessions and difficult conversations, and gradual acceptance of painful truths. "Thank you," Patricia said softly, "for honoring him, for not letting my mistakes erase his existence." Emma looked at her mother, this complicated woman who'd made terrible choices out of fear and desperation, who'd built a family on lies, but had also filled it with genuine love. Forgiveness was a process, not a moment, and Emma wasn't there yet, but she was trying. "We honor both of them," Emma said firmly. "Richard and Marcus. They both deserve that, and we deserve to know the whole truth of where we came from, even the messy parts." That evening, Emma and Olivia returned to the cemetery in Naperville, where Richard Turner was buried. They'd visited regularly over the 5 years since his death, but tonight felt different. Tonight they came with fuller knowledge, with a more complicated understanding of their family history. Richard's headstone had been updated, the new inscription gleaming in the late afternoon sun. Richard James Turner, 1961-2019, beloved husband and father. Fatherhood is measured not by biology but by love, devoted father of Emma and Olivia. Emma placed flowers at the base of the stone, her heart full of conflicting emotions. Love for the man who'd raised her, grief for the man who'd died loving her from afar, anger at the mother who'd orchestrated this complicated deception, and ultimately, acceptance of the messy, imperfect reality of their family. "Hi, Dad," Olivia said softly, using the title she'd always used, would always use. "We learned something recently, about our biology, but it doesn't change anything about you. You were our father. You are our father. Nothing can change that." They sat by Richard's grave as the sun set, talking to him the way they had when he was alive, sharing their discoveries and their struggles. And somewhere, Emma imagined Marcus Webb listening too, finally able to be acknowledged, his love finally validated after a lifetime of silence. In the months that followed, Emma and Olivia continued the complex work of integrating their new reality into their lives. They learned to make Elena Webb's recipes from the cookbook Marcus had saved, connecting with the Mexican heritage they'd never known they carried. They visited Marcus's grave when they traveled to Denver for work, leaving flowers and updates on their lives. They continued therapy with their mother, slowly rebuilding trust while acknowledging it would never be quite what it was before. And they learned that family was not a simple thing, that fatherhood could exist in multiple forms simultaneously, that love could be both present and distant, that truth could be painful but necessary, and that healing was possible even from the deepest betrayals. 1 year after that devastating birthday revelation, Emma and Olivia stood together in Emma's apartment, looking at a photo collage they'd created. Images of Richard holding them as babies, Marcus's surveillance photos of their childhood, pictures from Marcus's apartment of his solitary life, and recent photos of the memorials they'd created. A visual timeline of their complicated family story. "We survived this," Olivia said, leaning her head on Emma's shoulder. "We found out our entire family history was a lie, and we survived it." "We did more than survive," Emma corrected. "We learned to honor complicated truths. We learned that love exists in many forms. We learned that fatherhood is about presence and choice, not just biology. And we learned that family is something we define, not something that defines us." The twin secret that had once threatened to destroy them had instead taught them about resilience, forgiveness, and the complicated nature of love. 2 fathers, one who'd raised them and one who'd watched from afar. Both loved them completely. Both deserved to be remembered, honored, acknowledged. And Emma and Olivia, the daughters born from deception but raised with love, chose to carry forward both legacies, living proof that family was far more complex and beautiful than simple biology could ever define.